Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Priya of Hapny Home. Priya, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for having me, Cameron. I'm so excited to chat.
Of course. So to kick things off, I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Yeah, so my upbringing was largely uneventful, I would say. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. My parents immigrated here from India after having an arranged marriage. So I am first
Oh,
generation
wow.
American.
Wow.
My brother is 12 and a half years older than I am. So I was very much an accident child. And for all intents and
Same
purposes,
here.
hopefully, that's the
Yeah.
best. We're the best surprises. And so grew up as an only child for all intents and purposes because of that age gap. I would
Mhm.
say probably one of the biggest things about my childhood that is the most relevant to why we are chatting today is that my dad had his own cabinet hardware business. He still does. It actually turns 40 next year, which is a very exciting
Wow.
milestone. But so I
Wow.
have known that business and been around that business for my whole life. And it was a big part of my childhood. I would spend summers working there. My mom is the accountant. My brother
Wow.
graduated college and came back to join. So it was very much a thing in our family and really hard to separate the family from the
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
I feel like when that happens, you kind of tend to fall in one of two camps. It's either, okay, cool, I'm going to join this. This is my path. Or you're like, great, this isn't it. And I definitely did the latter. So I said I was never going to join the business, never going to be back in Houston. I'm getting out and doing my own thing. And, that's the
Yeah.
journey of life, I guess, because here we are. But so
Wow.
I left and went to NYU for my undergrad. So went to New York and studied journalism and economics. So a very different path, and
Yeah.
ended up kind of sticking around New York for a little bit after graduation too.
Incredible. I'd love to hear kind of the inspiration behind going into journalism. What kind of got you interested in that? Especially, it's a huge difference from the family background, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah, I was a huge reader growing up. That was a big thing, was I was kind of quiet and shy, and I would spend a lot of time at home. I had very strict parents, so there was
Mm.
not much socializing or going out for me. So I think that was where my love for books really started to come through. And through that, I really started to fall in love with writing. I am very much your grammar snob friend who's correcting your grammar. So all those things kind of just started to come together as I got older. I always loved my English classes, and just journalism felt like a very natural thing for me to start exploring, especially in an incredible city like New York, where there's so many stories, there's so many publications. It's just a mecca for really dabbling in that world. So I thought I
Mm.
would take advantage of that.
Yeah. Post graduation, I'm curious, what did that journey look like? Did you end up moving back or staying in New York? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I ended up sticking around New York. Surprise, surprise, I did not end up doing anything in journalism. And NYU
Mm.
actually makes you double major if you do journalism, I think, to help increase your chances of getting a job. So I double majored in economics and ended up working for Macy's.com, which
Mm.
at the time, it actually was separate from the brick and mortar
Wow.
company, like managed a bit separately. So it was almost just like more of a startup vibe, which was a really fun environment to enter into after graduating. So I
Yeah.
did assortment planning and financial planning there for about 2 years before my dad came knocking, asking what I was doing with my life. And I started to
Mm.
reflect a bit more. And then I actually left to go and get my MBA from UT in Austin. So that was my next big move after leaving New York.
Mm. At that time, did you have a vision of what that would look like post MBA? I'm curious, what route did you aspire to take after that? So you dropped journalism and then you went the Macy's route. Curious.
Yeah, so I had no idea what I was doing, to be completely transparent.
Mhm.
And I was still pretty young at the time. I had only had about 2 years of work experience, which a lot of MBA programs actually require you to have at least three. But UT was
Yeah.
one of the schools that was on the earlier side. So that was part of why I applied there. And I was still just kind of trying to figure it all out. I knew that if I had left, my only dream really I had had for myself was to be in New York. So I was in this very dramatic, like, I've left New York now. What do I do? Where do I go? And despite having never played sports ever in my life and never watching or following sports or really being athletic at all, I somehow started to get hung up on the idea of Nike. I just thought, I mean, from a marketing and branding perspective, I think still there's so few competitors that do it as good as Nike and do it
Yeah.
as well as Nike, actually. That's my grammar there. Um,
Mm.
and I knew that I wanted to go explore. I'd never been to Portland. I had never lived on the West Coast. It just felt like a new opportunity in a lot of ways. So
Mm.
I networked like crazy. I just flew out to Portland on a whim and tried to make my connections and see where I could end up. And I got very lucky that there was a team that needed help building a financial planning tool. And so it so
Mm.
perfectly aligned with my experience that I had had at Macy's and was a way for me to just
Mm.
get my foot in the door with an internship. So I ended up interning
Yeah.
there and then got a full-time offer and made the move out there after I graduated.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Just if you can paint the picture what that experience was like moving into that big corporate side at
Yeah.
Nike, and how long was that position? I'm curious that timeline there.
So how long for I ended up staying at Nike for about 5 years. So I had my three
Okay.
month summer internship. That position when I moved there, that was just actually the position that I had for my internship. And then once I
Mm.
joined full time, I was on a different team. So I held the cool thing about Nike is that even though it is such a huge, huge corporation, I feel more so than a lot of big companies, you get to move around a lot and not just between
Yeah.
teams, but actually between different functions, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So, I started in a much more like tech back end role, and then I quickly pivoted into more of a strategy role. And then my last
Wow.
role on the team ended up being on our membership team.
Mm.
So I even had like a stint where I was doing store and like helping with store openings and development. So you really get the
Mm.
chance to try out different things and try out different functions if you want
Yeah.
to. And so even though it was
Yeah.
huge, it was very cool and more of that entrepreneurial spirit in that sense that you can really pave your own path and you get to tap
Mm.
into the huge resource and an awesome culture that is Nike. And this
Yeah.
was amazing. I mean, Nike is just super, super cool in so many ways. It was like going back to school again, in a sense. You're just like
I love
in
it.
this whole campus outside of the city, just with some really awesome people all the time.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Post Nike or kind of this relationship with your parents and your dad at that time, I'm curious because I know it has a huge inspiration on your work today. So, what did that look like? Like the realization of potentially getting in out of Nike space, getting into hardware. I mean, it's drastic change.
Yeah. So it's a bit funny looking back that even in business school, I didn't have this inkling or desire to start my own company. Like it all
Yeah.
just, I was just totally in a different headspace. And then I would say in 2020, so once COVID hit and we were all stuck in our homes and we all kind of had all this time on our hands, that's probably when I really started to think more about this idea that I had but never really explored, which was
Mhm.
so I've moved around quite a bit and I rent apartments. I probably will
Yeah.
rent apartments for the foreseeable future, but I am
Yeah.
also somebody that loves my space and I love to invest in my space. I am affected deeply by my environment. And, like I think we were all feeling in COVID, we were stuck at home so much more. And there was this increased desire to make our homes feel more comfortable and like us. And that
Yeah.
was when I really started to think about hardware because I don't know if you've ever changed your hardware, but it
Yep.
is so simple. It is so renter friendly. You can do it on furniture. You can even do it on your cabinets. Like there's so many
Mm.
opportunities and it truly, truly does make such a big impact on the way that your space feels. And so
Yeah.
obviously I was biased growing up with the dad that I have, but I started to think a lot about how I wasn't really drawn to his company or his peers. And it's not a knock on what they had built. They built incredible companies serving great markets that exist.
Mhm.
But I was starting to notice a bit of a gap where I felt like there were retailers like Anthropologie or CB2 where they would have
Mhm.
hardware, but it would very much be an accessory or just like a side line that they were selling. So the quality wasn't necessarily there. And then you had
Yeah.
like my dad and his competitors, and those were the more quality, more technically sound, and like
Mm.
better product design. And there wasn't
Yeah.
anyone really bridging the gap. And then on top of it all, there's millions of hardware products out there. So it's so
Yeah.
overwhelming. And it is just such a clunky experience to have to maneuver and understand what you're getting and the different materials. And so I started to just think about all of that and really started to crystallize this idea of, okay, there is an opportunity here to create a brand that has personality, that's a little bit younger, that has more design forward, curated, less overwhelming product assortments, but that is
Yeah.
also rooted in quality. And we had this supplier that we've worked with the entire time my dad's business has been around. So we have a great relationship. We know the
Mm,
quality, we know the product is great. And now there was this chance to just kind of put a more fun face on it and really start
yeah.
to push the boundaries of what the designs could look like. And
Yep.
that was how Hapny was born.
Love it. What was that vision up front? So you kind of mentioned some different sectors of hardware. Like your dad is definitely more on like the elegant side,
Mhm.
thoughtful side. I'm curious, Hapney, what was that vision, kind of that customer characteristic that you wanted to fit for the hardware
Yeah,
launching?
I just wanted to have a little bit more fun with it, honestly. I it's
Yeah.
there's so much out there, like I said, and a lot of it isn't that, like, the quality is not great, or maybe the design isn't fully thought through. And so I wanted to mix a little bit of everything. I wanted to make sure I'm thinking through all the things that the end user doesn't even want to think about, like how sharp the corners are, where does the design show up on the pulls so that your fingers aren't getting rubbed
Mm,
against. Like, there's so many kind of boring things to think about when you make a pull. But then
yeah.
also, I just wanted to bring some joy. Like, at the end of the day, it really is such an intimate design choice, because there's things like vases and bookshelves and pillows, and there's a lot of things that you kind of put up
Mm,
and you look at, but you don't actually interact with. Whereas hardware, you're going to now touch this thing hundreds of times every day. Like, you're looking at it, but you're
yeah.
also interacting with it. It needs to work well, it needs to feel nice. And I wanted to create more of this feeling every time you're grabbing it, that just, like, to be a bit more intentional about what it is that you're putting there and how it feels and how it looks. And you can
Yeah.
have quality with also just like some fun, like my smiley knob. So just kind of challenging what it means to create serious quality hardware, with a
Yeah.
brand that feels colorful, and it speaks to joy, and it just has more of a good time.
Love it. Take us through that launch timeline. So you mentioned the discussion kind of came back in hardware around COVID
Yeah.
time. When was launch? And then also, I'm curious, was it all D2C at that time? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I launched officially in May of 2022. So
Okay.
once I got the idea, I kind of spent the biggest amount of time was probably formulating my designs and what that starting assortment would look like. Our suppliers are based out of Taiwan. So then if you go back and remember all the shipping issues
Yeah.
and the ports, like, there were a lot of just delays that were occurring in the world that ended up slowing me down a little bit, but it all worked out in the end. I knew that I wanted to just get the ball rolling. I kind of had this thing where if I don't act on this now, and it's like this, it was not the ideal time by any means to really explore launching a company, but I just knew that I
Mm,
wanted to start testing and start putting things out there to see how I could grow and adapt over time.
yeah.
So when I launched, I actually still at that time and still to this day I only sell to wholesalers. So I sell to brick and mortar retailers in the market. I don't
Got
sell
it.
direct to consumer yet.
Yep.
But that was just how I wanted to get going. We had this entire network that my dad had built over 40 years of really awesome decorative plumbing and bath showrooms across the country.
Mhm.
And so I tapped into some of the key accounts in all the major states and started there. And then what is great is that there are a lot of now online marketplaces as well that are really picking
Mm,
up on the idea of hardware and the importance of hardware. And I've seen that space start to grow more and more over time, whether that's through the brick and mortar accounts themselves having an online channel, or just through online channels dedicated solely to hardware.
mm.
And I was able to get on to a lot of those accounts pretty early on, which is really helpful. And
Wow.
I just started growing.
Incredible. Yeah. So at this time of the rollout, I'm curious, what did the capital side look like? Did you do any funding rounds well, I'm curious.
I am bootstrapping. I
Everyone's
have been bootstrapping this baby
wow.
from the beginning. One
It's
of the
incredible.
hardest things about this is that it's so inventory heavy, and that's always going to
Yeah.
be the hardest part of this type of business. So that is where all my money is in my
Wow.
inventory and inventory management. But I'm
Yeah.
very fortunate. I moved back to Houston. It is relatively a more affordable place to be. I had to make some serious decisions and trade-offs in my personal life of where I wanted to be and how I was going to do this in a way that felt the most risk-free and felt the most
Yeah.
viable. So moved back home, got some like financial benefits in that angle. And then through that, just had saved up for years and really took a big risk on this. At the front end, I got a little bit of help from my family,
Mhm.
which I've paid off. And then ever since then, I've just
Awesome.
thankfully been growing at a rate that feels really healthy and sustainable. And as a result, I've been able to just kind of stay on top of my finances. Everything I'm making, I'm funneling back in. But I'm very
Yeah.
fortunate that I haven't had to take out any loans yet. I haven't had to go through
Yeah.
fundraising. So right now I'm still 100% full ownership of the company.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. So majority of our guests are, I would say, 80%
Yeah.
D2C e-com companies. So I'm curious on the wholesale side. We don't have too many discussions around this, but are there any like major wholesalers that you would say accumulate majority of the business, like big accounts that you were able to shift from your dad? I'm curious.
Yeah. So probably some of my bigger online accounts are MyNobs or Build. So
Yeah.
Ferguson is a huge showroom, brick and mortar network across the country, and then Build is their online channel. So I would say both of those accounts really dominate online. And then
Yeah.
I've had a couple of key accounts that I mean, so much of my role right now too involves traveling and sales and pitching and meeting in person because again, there's so many lines and there's so many products. And so building that
Yeah.
one-on-one relationship is really key. So San Diego Hardware in San Diego is a big account for me. There are a couple in New
Mm.
York, like Simon's Hardware, that I was able to get into. That's kind of an iconic showroom in the tri-state area. Miller's
Yeah.
Elegant in Florida. There are some key accounts that I would say Nob Hill in Minnesota. So like kind of spread out.
Yeah.
I made sure
Yeah.
I tried to cover as much as I could from a physical brick and mortar perspective in the market. And I would say like driving these relationships one-on-one with these accounts has really made a difference. And they do end up making a bulk of my sales.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious from that point of view, what does marketing look like for you guys? What do you find that performs well, especially being a consumer product, but going through wholesalers?
Yeah, it's tricky. I would say it's tricky
Yeah.
just because so much of what I even as a consumer interact with, I can't really replicate for my own company. Um,
Yeah.
but so I've been able to do a lot of what I take on is just general brand awareness. The showrooms themselves, there are some that are more advanced than others in terms of their marketing, their social channels. I really try to partner and leverage that platform that the showrooms have as much as possible. So we'll co-create content or we'll push each other's content out on our own channels and just kind of
Mhm.
build around that. But at the end of the day, I think what drives the most for me is just a customer or a designer coming in and asking for my products. And so
Yeah.
I've been focused a lot of my efforts are focused on just awareness with designers and that whole section of the trade. So really a lot of email outreach, a lot of Instagram, a lot of posting, Pinterest. Those are some of the big
Yep.
channels and just showing lifestyle imagery of my knobs in scenes so that people can get a sense of what it looks like. And just driving general awareness in the media outlets that I know members of the trade and ultimately
Mm.
my customers of the showrooms will be
Yep.
looking to.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. So, I experienced some samples actually recently, and I'm going to put them up in one of our guest bathrooms, and it's so beautiful. The feeling feels incredible. They're heavyweight. I'm curious, like, what do you find is the main customer overall? Because it's a beautiful product, but it also has different spins. I know there's the smiley ones, as you mentioned, but there's also the timeless pieces.
Yeah, I would say that the end customer is really drawn. What I do see is the smiley drives a lot of interest and a lot of like fun marketing and brand awareness. But then a lot of what people still end up buying, at least through the channels that I'm in, are the more timeless classic silhouettes. So, like what you're saying, the
Yeah.
simpler, like mod, which I believe is what you received. So, I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear that you like it. Yes, they are
So
very
beautiful.
heavy. Some of them
Yeah.
double as like weapons, is my joke. You can just unscrew it and knock someone out. They are so that's because they're solid brass, so they're hefty and they're good quality and they'll last. Um,
Yeah.
those clean designs are, I know, what sell like bread and butter. And so a lot of what my design philosophy is for my future collections is I want to take something that feels classic. It's not too over the top. It's not too whimsical or novelty. but it's something that feels simple but has a bit of an interesting edge to it. So like having something
Yeah.
classic with a little twist, so that way it feels
Mm.
differentiated. The person who is paying attention to it um, is drawn to it, and I think that's who ends up being my customer. Is either like I do well with the designers, and then I also do well with clients who are looking for something simple and classic that feels good, but they
Mm.
also want something that's a little bit like, oh, that's interesting. I noticed this
Yeah.
one little feature about it. And it's not just your standard boring hardware that exists. So it's all the
Mm.
above.
Yeah. No, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Talking on the inventory, mentioning that that's where majority of capital is held, I'm curious, what does that supply chain look like? So, manufacturer, you said, is in Taiwan, and then where do you guys hold inventory, and then where do you ship?
So we hold in our warehouse, we have a warehouse in Houston. So that is where we're
Okay.
based, and we hold all our inventory there. So we
Yep.
receive our shipments either by air or by sea through from Taiwan, and then we hold and we drop ship or we ship directly to our showroom customers from our warehouse.
Yep.
Um, it is just the inventory management is interesting. I think one of the big learnings I had that makes a lot of sense, but I didn't really think through as much, I guess, before I launched, was that there's no standardization of order size when it comes to hardware.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
every configuration of every room and every home or apartment is different, whether it's knobs or pulls and how many. And so it's really hard to predict how an order is going to come through, how big it's going to be, how many products I need. And then there's also this interesting element of my items being codependent on each other in a way where, like, if you need knobs and pulls and an appliance pull for your kitchen, and I'm out of stock
Mhm.
of the appliance pull, I screw up the whole order in that sense. Like,
Uh,
you can't just, if I buy a shirt and shoes, they're not dependent on each other in that way. Mine is, we're
yeah.
creating an entire space of different product types. And so I have to make sure I
Yeah.
have all the stock of every single product type that you would need in every size and every finish. And so I
Wow.
think that's probably been the biggest area of just learning and opportunity for me, is to try to predict how much of
Yeah.
every type of every SKU, and especially again because I'm bootstrapping it, I need to like be as intelligent as I can be with my
For
funds.
sure.
So it's
Love it.
been probably the biggest learning curve about the inventory.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, Priya, I like to conclude each episode with this. If you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
Yeah, I think if I look back at my own experience, I think, and this is advice is kind of two sides of the same coin. So I would say take each side with a grain of salt. I
Yeah.
think it's very easy to get caught up with making everything feel perfect, or oh my gosh, I need to like feel good, and it's scary, and it sometimes gets very easy to just spin on the pre-launch. And at some
Mm.
point you do have to just, it's always going to be scary. Like, there's never going to be a perfect time. Rarely is that ever the case. And so I think the moment that it starts to feel a little more exciting than it does scary is when you just got to kind of rip off the
Mm.
band-aid and go. But in
Yep.
the same vein, I do think there's so much value in setting yourself up to have as like to de-risk yourself as much as possible ahead of launch, just because
Mm.
it's so unpredictable. And at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you can have a great product, you can have product market fit, you can have content, you can have everything. And if you yourself are not fully in it, and you're feeling stressed, or you're feeling burnt out, or like you're distracted and you're not able to fully focus and give it your all, it's going to fall apart faster than you realize. And so
Yeah.
doing what you need to do to, like, for me, that was moving to a city that I maybe didn't want to move back to, or like making some personal trade-offs and compromises that helped set me up for the most successful chance of doing it as possible.
Mm.
um I think don't underestimate that. Like, don't underestimate the
Yeah.
extra couple of months of a salary and a regular paycheck or health
Mm.
insurance, and taking all those things into account. But then, of course, don't hold on to
For
that for
sure.
too long. Get going
For sure.
whenever you're ready.
For sure. Well, love it. And we don't normally have many people who bootstrap and have adjustments and major changes that you've made. So it's really inspiring and impressive what you're doing.
Awesome. Thank
Um,
you.
well, yeah, to the listeners out there, make sure you guys check out Hapny Home at hapnyhome.com.